Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance,
And I'm George-Affleck.
and it's time for
Batten down the hatches. UnSpun. What a week. What a
Still
week
Traumatized.
of not politics, but chaos. And you actually, so we're talking about the floods, obviously, out of the gate here, because how can we not? And your column this week in the Orca, uh, it was compelling. And anybody who hasn't wants to, but I'm going to steal the thunder because I want you to tell this
Go
story
ahead.
here because
Tell, tell. Yeah.
because it encapsulates a lot of what people dealt with. You just well, I won't give away the ending, but go tell us what happened for you because I think it's really important.
Well, I think it's interesting that at the very, because I rarely go, oh yeah, I don't know, I'm going to go away for a couple days at the end of this podcast. And last week, that's exactly what we did. It was very weird because I actually closed my computer and thought, why did I say that I was going away? And now it's like, that was where the first domino fell. Went up to Kamloops, spent 4 days up there. Yeah, it was relentless rain in Vancouver. We had heard about the atmospheric river that was coming. Everybody was talking about, epic rainfalls, but nobody thought a month worth of rain in 2 days, which is what ended up happening. Of course, we know that now. But we
Hmm.
were up, Brian and I, we went up to Kamloops and we had done all the right things, right? We purchased a new vehicle, a used vehicle that's new, but made sure it had the proper tires and that it was a bigger vehicle and that it was built for those mountain passes, right? Because we want to be responsible when we're traveling to and from the interior. And just frankly, our little teeny tiny city cars were not cutting it for safety. So we did
True.
that. And then for our return, because we were up there for 4 nights and we came back on Sunday morning, we decided to leave
Hmm.
early. And that's where my column starts, is leaving early, because we were thinking to ourselves, there was some snow dusting up in the Kamloops area Saturday night into Sunday, and more snow expected. That's the interior. That's what happens there. And so going over two summits, we got to go over the, Merritt summit there that goes Kamloops to Merritt, and then you go over the Coquihalla, which everybody knows that summit so well.
Hmm.
And everybody that we know said, make sure you travel that part of the summit, the Coquihalla, during the warmest time of the day. So do that at noon. Don't do it in the dark. Don't do it
Because
too
of
early in the morning.
because of
Don't do it too
ice.
early
Thinking because of
because of
ice.
ice and
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the weather and it's
So we were
dark
like,
and
we got all the way to Merritt. We had a full tank of gas. We, grabbed ourselves a sandwich and some fries, and we thought, okay, let's keep going on the road. And we're, literally eating French fries on our way to just head right. You know where the split is. You either go to Kelowna or you
yeah,
to the left, or you go right to the Coquihalla, and then you don't
up the hill. Yep.
stop for 289 clicks before your next gas or whatever it is. Anyway, so but we got this. I tell it in more detail in the column, but how the process went. But long story short, of course, we didn't go toward the Coquihalla because there had just been a mudslide there. So we're like, okay, well, at least we weren't in it, and we headed left, and then we went through the beautiful Nicola Valley, and then we took the turn to Princeton, and we started snaking down that single lane highway, right? Like, and then it started to rain. And then, George, this is where it got real for me. I started going around these
Hmm.
corners and there were boulders. And I mean, like, not, how sometimes he says, watch for falling
Yeah.
rocks, and there's like a couple
Right.
of little whatever. I'm talking like the
Hmm.
size of my Prius on
Wow.
the opposite lane, and one in our lane because we were going slowly enough because there were so many of us in traffic, because
Whoa.
everybody that was going on the Coquihalla all of a sudden is on this highway. And I'm still beside myself. Anyways, read it in the column about the bits of it. But our friends, it was right around this time that our friends had texted us. It would have just been before the boulder, actually, because we lost cell service. But they had texted saying, "Hey, heads up
To add to it.
that the Highway 5 is closed, the Coquihalla is closed. There's been a mudslide." And we texted back, "Yeah, we know. We're about 90 minutes ahead of you. We're headed towards Princeton. We're just headed." And so they were 90 minutes behind us coming from Salmon Arm. That's part of the story. We get to Princeton, the river's like the Similkameen. Oh my gosh. I was like, holy, big tree going by. I'm like, okay, this is weird. And then it just started to grow from there. It was sheets of rain. It was the spray from the other side of the road makes it so you can't even see where you're going. Then the guy in front of us had a couple of ATVs on a trailer in the back, and he hit a pothole that made his ATVs bounce, and we went around it like this. Just like,
Yeesh.
We would have blown a tire on that pothole. Then we hit the next one and the next one. And then a semi goes by and it sprays us down. I couldn't see for like 3 seconds, which was the longest 3 seconds of my life. And we weren't even in Sunshine Valley yet, which, by the way, not sunny at all,
It's a
sunny in
misnomer.
Sunshine Valley. That's when you could almost not see the welcome to sign. And it was just after that, George, I mean, it was the longest 7 hours of my life. But that last 4 hours, going from Princeton all the way home to downtown Vancouver. I mean, by the end of it, Brian was playing, an all tragically hip greatest hits playlist as we were coming in, through Burnaby Lakes and whatever, just to keep me calm because I was driving. He's like, just, it's all good. It's all good. Let's rock out to Gord. But it was crazy. So we get home and it was like this, I can't believe what we just went through. And then we checked in with our friends who were 90 minutes behind and they said, we're stuck in Agassiz in Hope. They were seconds before a slide. So grateful that
On the other side of the slide, so they were trapped behind the slide.
they got home last night. They got home on Wednesday
Oh,
night. That was Sunday. They got home Wednesday, just when they opened that little stretch of Highway 7 briefly so that they could get through. There's so much to this story. I've been covering it for Al Jazeera every day since, and just, looking at the footage and hearing the harrowing stories and seeing the people who are coming together to help. Like, we're going to get into supply chain and what about fuel and what, da, da, da. But before we
mm-hmm.
do, Steve Booth and his significant other, Kelly Tyndall, were keeping us updated on the kindness of strangers. Like the first 2 nights they slept in their car, and then they were taken in by
Doing
strangers,
that
and
work.
then they
I
started
heard
took
her
all their
actually
food
on
out.
Mike Smith this morning. I heard her
Yeah,
on Mike Smith this morning. Yeah. So basically, through a network, she found some people through some people who put them up for a couple of nights. I mean,
it's
that's
crazy.
and the that story is it ends happy, and of course there are some tragedies, as we know, that we're slowly hearing about. And human and we don't know how many cows and how
Animals.
many wildlife. There's I heard somebody tell me about so a kennel was completely washed out, dog kennel in the valley. Uh,
You know what?
these
Let's
stories are
go
starting
in
to come out.
order here. Let's go in some kind of order here. Read the rest of my column because really it's about preparedness. And when you think
Yes.
you've prepared, you haven't. But what we had in our car, we could have had a pop-up restaurant for a few days because that's kind of how we roll because we're freaks like that. But no state of emergency, or now a state of emergency called. But at the time, where was the
Yeah.
emergency alert? Why wasn't my cell phone blowing up with like beep, beep, beep?
Yeah. What would you have done though? Would you, if you'd got that emergency alert before would you have stayed in Kamloops? What do you, and that because now you'd be stuck there. You wouldn't be able to come home uh,
You know what,
for
though?
who knows how long.
I probably would have. I would have jumped into managing, obviously my son was in Vancouver while I was in Kamloops. I would have
Oh, he
made
wasn't
sure
with
he
you.
was
Oh,
covered.
wow.
No, I had the
Okay.
dogs with me and, even had a friend who was staying in our house. So I would have stopped because what people need to understand and what I try to learn from doing news coverage is sometimes we get in the way. We, the people, get in the way of events like this. But when I was leaving Kamloops,
Right.
when the Coquihalla closed
Literally
before
in
and
the
I
way. Like
traveled. Right.
literally. Yeah. You're talking literally in the way. Like get out of
Literally,
my way.
physically in the way. But we couldn't have imagined when we were leaving Kamloops that every highway to and from the lower mainland would be shut down. Like this is this is epic because I've left Oliver, BC and taken the Hope Princeton Highway because the Coquihalla had a semi that was on fire and was closed.
Right.
So would I have stayed
Or
had I gotten
snow
an alert that
or
said the
something.
Coquihalla was
Yeah.
closed? Probably not. But if my alert went off and said every highway in the province is shut off, I would have stayed put. I would have listened.
First of all, you would have gone, come on, what? But here we are. Here we are. And the scale of this, and there was MP Brad Viz, I think, from Abbotsford, Merritt.
Mission.
There was
Yeah.
three of them,
Mission.
that
Yeah.
area up there in the valley. Went on a tear to the media in Ottawa when they were asking him about a senator that they were going to be talking about, and whether and he's hold on. Why are you asking me about this? Why don't you ask me what's happening in British Columbia right now? And he went on like for a 5 to 8 minute. If you go on and check this video out, and he was always like, "This is not a partisan issue. I don't think the rest of Canada understands the impact of this, and it's huge. It's huge because our port is basically closed. You can't get trains there or trucks, so nothing's going in and nothing's coming up. But hey, guess what? Look out! If you live in Vancouver, you look out there. They're almost at max capacity of ships, container ships that could be there." To unload, waiting to unload because they can't because there's no trains coming into Vancouver. There's a multi-million billion dollar problem we have,
Yeah,
and who knows
that's
when those
the
trains
Ever
are gonna.
Given Canadian style. Remember the Ever Given in the Suez Canal? That stuck
Oh
ships
yeah,
that stopped everything.
yes,
So this is the
100. This is
Canadian Ever Given, right? You
it's
look out
it's a
into Burrard
hundred
Inlet,
times worse, 100 times worse because
but
there's no easy solution.
the ships that are stuck are just backing
Right?
up and backing up and backing
Yes,
up. So exacerbating a problem that we've already had because of that supply chain issue. And you've got COVID on top of that. And now we have
we
to
already
deal
had
with,
supply issues. Yeah,
right. So
yep,
let's dig through this sort of unspun one by one. You have talked
yeah,
about being concerned with inflation before all of this. So
yes.
that's going to come into play here. But supply chain first, because you've talked about that here on the program.
Yes, and I was talking about this a long time ago because at first it was surprising that COVID didn't lead to any supply chain issues way back, like during the crisis. We all hoarded toilet paper and all that craziness that happened at the beginning. Then it turns out, hey, guess what? Manufacturing wasn't that impacted. They were able to actually distribute, get stuff out there, make stuff. People were still buying things. They were just hunkered down at home. So the supply chain literally at that time wasn't affected. But then as a
Yeah.
result of all the other things, even just China being shut down for several weeks, it caused all these delays in everything from chip manufacturing to, how the world connects together is key. And so now we're seeing the results of COVID, 2 years after the fact, because everything's backed up and you need this piece for that and that piece for that. So that was already happening. And I started doing stuff talking about this on NW way back in April, May, whenever it was because there wasn't a lot of talk about it then, and there wasn't a lot of talk about solutions because there is no solution because it really is the private sector that has to figure that stuff out. They need to produce more. We have this worker shortage. We have all that problem too, which is nobody saw that coming. People aren't moving around on Earth to live somewhere else. The Australians aren't coming to Vancouver to work in Whistler right now. They're just not. They can now, but they're not. Nobody's moving. Nobody's getting around. So that's causing untold amounts of problems. And now, if you look at this issue here in British Columbia at I think it's North America's largest port, Vancouver's port, just by sheer volume, shut down basically. And it's not. There is Prince Rupert, which we can redirect a lot of the train traffic to Prince Rupert, and those ships maybe could get up there. Maybe that's the solution. Seattle, but it's not like these ports are like a tap. You can't just. It's not a simple. They're max capacity all the time.
Yeah.
And so and in America, if you send them to America, guess what's going to happen? Of course, the cost is going to go up. So we're already dealing with inflation because of all the massive amount of spending. So I predicted way back when we started, when the government started just printing money to underwrite the challenge of COVID and give us all
COVID.
money
Yeah.
to live. But that always historically leads to massive inflation sometime afterwards, and we're already seeing that. We're at 3.5, 4, 5% inflation right now. We're probably going to head towards double-digit inflation before this time next year. And now in this region, we're going to have micro-inflation because of supply of the basics that we need, including gas and all those other things. So,
Let's talk about that. Let's
it's
let's
going to be a
let's
real
dive into
challenge.
that a little bit more because with regard to, I want to go to agriculture for sure because when you say, the more localized things, that the agriculture hit that was taken in Sumas Prairie, Abbotsford, Chilliwack area as a whole, seeing Highway 1 completely flooded. It's unbelievable what we've witnessed, and yet, as you had mentioned, entire farms have been taken out, entire barns have been destroyed. The
Yep.
number of cattle and chicken and pigs that have either died
Mm-hmm.
or will need
Cows,
to be
milk.
destroyed because they've been
Mm-hmm.
all the milk has been dumped. There was nowhere to get to it, save it,
No,
move
yeah,
it,
but just the
power,
cows that can't be milked,
the cows,
they get
totally all of
infected,
it.
and
Right.
mhm.
So it's going to take. They're saying it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars already. And that's not until you have to look at building up the
Easy.
infrastructure. It's hundreds of millions of dollars just lost in the last few days.
Oh, I see.
in
Yes, yes.
in the established. Well,
And
that
the
was the
water's
statistic
still
that we
there. We
got
don't even know
from
what's on. Yeah, we don't even know what's underneath there yet. The water's still there.
exactly.
We don't even know what the highways look like and how much crap is going to be on those highways just to clear that.
Yeah, which is
It's
what
just
the Canadian forces are
yes.
coming to help with. So they're doing rescue, they're doing cleanup, heavy machinery, and what
Hmm.
have you, and then assessment, and then it is the engineering piece. Because I mean, look at those bridges on the Coquihalla. This is not like, oh, there's a mudslide on the Coquihalla. Entire chunks of road are
It's shocking.
completely gone. It's shocking.
Yeah, it's
It's not going
shocking.
to be fixed in a day.
No, and those Bailey bridges that the army can set up, those they only go so they can only reach so far. You know, I saw those images and I'm thinking, holy crap, I thought those bridges were better built. And it turns out there was a report done 10 years ago recommending a bunch of upgrades to the Coquihalla Highway and the bridges to deal with the effects of climate change. And none of that stuff has been implemented in those 10 years. And we've had two different kind of governments in power in that 10 years. There's been no strategy or plan as far as I know. There's been some updates of some stuff, but this report was written 10 years ago, and we're seeing the result of inaction by government. Um, you know, it's shocking to see how, I don't know, temperamental, sensitive. What's the word I'm looking for these bridges? The precarious, these bridges that we cross
Precariousness, yeah.
over up on the. I was like, what? That's all it was. It was just that much space between the earth
Girders.
and a bridge.
Yeah, that was
So
it.
it was, yeah.
And then you think about how long it takes, like driving to and from the interior of British Columbia, anybody who's done it on a regular basis, they've been, you know, widening one area. They've been, upgrading the blacktop or the cement, whatever. I think it's blacktop where they're
Yeah.
doing it right now. And it takes 2 summers for them to just lay that. I mean, there is a significant amount of repair to be done on just that stretch. Who would have ever thought, George, that it would be the Sea to Sky Highway that's the one that's the least impacted?
It's the newest
You know,
one.
it is the
It's the
newest
newest
one.
one as
That's
far
a
as
great
being
unspun
upgraded.
point.
Yeah,
That
no,
is a
210,
great
it was
unspun.
updated for the Olympics, and
Yeah,
a lot
really.
of that was related to stuff that was falling off the cliffs all around it, and certainly the Hope Princeton
Boulders.
has not been dealt with in a long time. But I was just surprised that Coquihalla was such a mess. That highway,
I
I guess,
wasn't
is
so
young
much so
and
though
40 years old
after,
max.
but the mudslides don't surprise me because of the fires. So that and the amount of debris that
Yeah,
comes sliding down a mountain exponentially greater when there are a bunch of dead trees to be just swept away. But it's the actual infrastructure of those bridges. I can't even
yeah.
speak to the Hope Princeton Highway, how it was like rivers running off walls of rock onto the road.
Yeah,
It was
I remember
ridiculous.
people were saying photos prior to the chaos ensuing. There was a couple of photos I saw of people on their Facebook feeds who live in those areas. This is prior to the real problem, and it was almost like, oh, cool, look at that, look at that. We don't usually have a waterfall in our backyard, kind of thing. Like, what happened to that waterfall
Yeah,
now?
everywhere, dude.
Uh, yeah.
So let's talk a
So,
little
but
bit
you know,
about Trans Mountain
we're in a state
too.
of emergency. But we're in a
Oh,
state of,
yeah.
oh yeah, first, because I want to talk about the state of emergency and that delay. But yeah, Trans Mountain, we're in day 3 now of shutdown of Trans Mountain, and love or hate Trans Mountain pipeline, it actually is, I think, represents a third of all the gas we put in our cars. And so that's a big chunk of gas we're not going to have. So people are panicking, and please don't panic.
I
But
hope
you know,
people don't
because
panic. If you're listening
they're
to our
panicking.
voices, If you're listening to our voices, your panic and hoarding will make this exponentially worse. The people that are running to their local grocery store and stocking up like it's war times are really putting others at great risk, because what is on store shelves is what our usual shopping habits are. And if all of a
Hmm.
sudden your weekly shop turns into your 3 month shop, you're not leaving any for your neighbor. And there are warehouses with food. There's lots of food here. There's lots of canned
Yes,
food. There's frozen food. There's dried food. We
we can
literally
still
live in a
get. So this
country
is a
of lentils. We're
regional.
fine. We're fine.
It's a regional. Remember, this is a regional catastrophe, uh, but because the world can still get to us in different ways. Maybe not down the Coquihalla, but you can come up from the south. You can come from the ocean. You know, we can go from
Planes.
Prince Rupert all the way back to Vancouver. We can. There's lots of empty planes right now waiting to be
Lots of empty
used
planes.
for whatever. Amazon's been using them already. So there is solutions, and I think people need to calm down and not hoard because it just hurts everybody else. So just
It really
anyways,
does.
we can. Horgan talked about this, but it's really and I think the gas thing is well, that's going to be a challenge. We're gonna it's because it's going to have to come from down south if unless Kinder Morgan or not Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain
Trans Mountain. We
says
own
within
this
the next
one,
couple of days,
George.
yeah, that it says it'll be open and so on. So they can't really make anything until the water's gone. They can't even analyze up what's going on in the valley because they can't see it.
But we just
So
have to
it's
calm down until we can assess that, because we do have access through Cherry Point. And luckily that's where the
mhm,
majority of what fuels YVR comes from, because we've all learned so much about pipelines in recent years.
yeah.
But the closure of the Trans Mountain pipeline is concerns over its integrity, not that there's been some great breach, but it needs to be checked. But first we got to
Hmm.
rescue the people, then we got to rescue the animals, then we got to assess the damage, and then we reopen things. I think that's what I'm hearing from experts. Anyway, and really what I
Yes.
want to get to here that I think is important, and George, you and I talk about the effects of climate change. We've been doing that all too often, it feels, since we've had what, a heat dome and a bomb cyclone and now an atmospheric river. These are all official meteorologist terms. These are not things that are made up by mainstream
Yeah.
media to just torque it. These are actual terms,
No.
but
And
they're new terms because of climate
yes,
change.
absolutely. And when I was in office, people I would get tagged by the party in power at that time, and by many people saying I was some kind of climate change denier, and I never was. My argument was always you need to prioritize how you spend your money on the right things that work that create the most impact on reducing the GHGs. And one of the things that always drove me crazy is we don't really track greenhouse gas emissions, certainly at a local level, in a way that we should. We don't focus on bike lanes are great, but they don't solve the climate. The one question I asked, back in the day was, if we don't, we had our goals for Vancouver, and the solution to getting to those goals was mass transit. And at that time, none of that was. It was all in holding pattern. There was nothing being planned, and that was if we did more mass transit, we would get to our goals. So the question you have to ask yourself as a government all the time in order to get to these goals are we doing the right things, or is this just lipstick on a whatever? So So I mean, I think it's
I
important
think you
that
can say pig. You're
uh,
going to piss off the vegans, but you can say lipstick on a pig. I'm just going to say. But I hear what you're saying,
yes,
but that's why when it's frustrating, I remember earliest of times when, my mom would say, turn off the lights. Got to conserve energy. Turn off the lights. Like I'm talking 1970s,
yeah,
right?
sure, I remember
Turn
that.
off the lights.
Hmm.
And then I'd be driving down with her and I'd be in the back seat, no seatbelt, probably lying across the back window because that's how safety concerned we were back then.
Oh yeah,
And I would point to all of the buildings and I'd be like, all these lights are on. Are there people in there? Oh no, they've all got home for the day. Why are the lights still on? Why don't they turn them
but
off?
isn't it pretty? That's right. That's right.
It's
So
interesting though,
the
like trying to
the
explain why we're demanding that individuals make these huge sweeping changes when on a whole other scale we're subsidizing things that cause more GHGs. Like there's a real disconnect right now. But if you
there is.
look back, and we've talked about this before, if you look back, I said 70s, but you brought up when we were planning today's program, Al Gore. Like what,
Hmm.
what
If you
the
look at
movie
the
he made.
images, yeah, if you look at the images in his documentary, they are literally the images of British Columbia this summer. Fires, floods. This will be the future. You're like, yes, it's the now. Which brings me to another point. So the whole, we can talk about the environment. We could talk about COP26, and we could say, what's the world going to do? China and Russia didn't show up at COP26. They are the biggest emitters. They didn't show up. They're not committed to reducing their GHGs, and without them dealing with it, we're screwed. And so, what the government, sadly, because Canada, I think, represents 2% of all the GHGs that are emitted on Earth, or something. But we are seeing the most climate change of any country on Earth.
Twice as fast. Twice as
Yeah, I
fast
imagine
in
Russia is
Canada,
too, and China, but they're
northern,
yeah,
right? But
yeah.
northern, like the
Any
Arctic,
country
is
northern, yeah,
3 times faster. Yeah.
3 times faster.
And
And so, sadly, we know this is true, and yet we're we're putting a lot of energy in Canada and money into climate change initiatives to deal with the way we. But in fact, that will incrementally reduce our footprint, which is great. But those billions of dollars, the question you have to ask yourself as a country and how you spend your money. And this isn't about being against climate change, but it's saying, we need to keep our people safe and not to invest any money that we might have in keeping our roads working and our train systems working, and all these other things will lead to what we're seeing in a microcosm right now, and right now, literally in British Columbia, will now start happening around the world when these kinds of things happen. And governments need to kind of plan for this. Local governments are. Vancouver is doing a good job at planning for, whether it be earthquakes or whether it be flooding. There's all the policies related to where you build. You have to have all these flood plans. It's very expensive, but you have to do it because the assumption will be we're going to have more floods. But you don't see the same initiatives on capital projects in this country. Certainly, we have seen that on the Coquihalla this week. Clearly, these bridges were underbuilt. They were underbuilt for what we know is coming. Sadly, it's sad. It's terrible. We're going to see this change. It's happening, and we may not survive it.
Prepare for it.
But we, as a country who represents such a small pound, but we're putting all of our eggs in the environmental thing when we should be looking at infrastructure, and how we actually can live in this new world order, which sucks, of course, but it's here, literally here now. We are living it. The world that we will see in the future is already here. Giant fires this summer, floods now. We got to deal with this and start building for the horrible future. Sadly, it sounds like I'm sorry, people, but it's like we have to plan for the worst. It's like what you say. Need to plan for the worst, hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's what you do. And I don't get the sense that any government is doing that federally or provincially in this country. And it's going to get worse, and we're not ready for it. Clearly.
No. And that's going back to the title of the column, really. Like, leaving early is not good enough. We can't be early on our little crusades that do nothing only to find that the wall of water is, coming over us, or the massive pothole is right before us, or the bridge is gone. And how do we protect ourselves with better tires, better windshield wipers, and something in place on those bridges to keep them steady, even in the worst possible storm? You know what I love about this crazy story that we're telling here is that we're 26 minutes into our podcast and we haven't even really mentioned COVID-19 yet. I think that's a first since March of 2020. So I'm just going to slide in the fact that Pfizer approved by Health Canada for the 5 to 11-year-olds. That should be announced in the next week or two in terms of how that rollout is going to go here in BC. Parents of small children likely already know that they could register their kids so that when rollout happens and how it happens, that lesser dose of Pfizer, it's a smaller dose. Therefore, Dr. Henry was saying that the pain associated with it and when getting the shot is much less, and the reaction is likely much less, if not
minimal,
zero. And she said nothing's 100%, but it's pretty damn close because kids are resilient at the best of times. So that's really good. And I also want to mention the PCR test for those returning to Canada or traveling here. No. Do you want your money back, George? No. It's 72 hours no, but
right
this
PCR test, this is ridiculous. And they still haven't announced. They're apparently announcing it tomorrow. That will for 72 hours. But for God's sakes, what's happening in British Columbia right now? We're going to need to go across the border a lot. And to get our shopping potentially. I mean, that's might be the only way we get some groceries. I don't know. But do we really need to be so strict? If we're double or triple vaccinated up here and you're down there, what is the problem? Why are we delaying on this? Come on, let's open the borders up.
Just an antigen test. Antigen test. Just get one of the tests that you can buy at Costco and you show the test. Show the test. Why are we not? I think
it's not easy.
Needs to happen.
It's still not
no,
fun.
It's not easy.
Yeah. But still, it's like, come on. And I think right now, given what's going on in the chaos in this, to maybe alleviate the nuttiness going on at the gas stations and in the stores, let's get normal border crossing immediately so that people can go to get their gas, get their groceries if they want to do that, and that will, I think, alleviate that stress that we're having about supply chain.
Can you imagine how busy Point Roberts will get suddenly if that happens?
I
hope so, because they need it. They could definitely use the business. Grounds. You know what I'm saying? It is totally. We have so much more to cover, and yet we're out of time, George. So people are going to have to meet us back here. I know we didn't even get into the state of emergency delay. Anyways, whatever. It's like this. We will. Next week. We will. Next week. A big shout out to the people who make a point of listening to this podcast each and every week. We hear you. We see you. We love it when you add us on Twitter. It's very fun. Of course, you can follow George on Twitter at George.
underscore.
Affleck. I'm at Jody Vance, Jody with a Y, at Jody Vance. Of course, you go to the orca.ca to read everything BC related and sign up for the Fin, that newsletter that our editor in chief, McLean K, does each and every Monday to Friday before you're awake, pretty much. He's an early riser, gets this done, reads all of the publications,
How does he
every
do it?
newspaper. He just gathers it all together and makes it super cool and easy for us to keep up to date on all
Puts
the
his
things.
visor
And
on. His
he does.
visor
He
and
just
he's
like,
like licking his finger,
so good.
turning the pages in those newspapers.
All right. Say goodbye, George.
Bye-bye.
Bye.